Okay, welcome everyone to the 11th Hyperloop workshop. This is career development. My name is Manshaa Verma, and then I'll be hosting today's workshop. But we also have a guest speaker here, Alex, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Alex. I graduated from Cal Poly this past May, and I used to be in CPP Hyperloop, and I now work at an aerospace company called Safran.
Okay, so there's 3 sections to this workshop. The first one is cover letters, then we're talking a little bit about resumes, and then interviewing. During each section or after each section, we'll be asking Alex questions and probably prompting Chris too. So for cover letters, oh, there's a chat. Nice to meet you. For cover letters, there's a few key components. We have a header, a greeting, an introduction, qualifications, a closing, and a signature. And then on the right, we can see just an example that I used this summer when I was applying to an aerospace fasteners manufacturing company. They actually reached out to me on Handshake, and we were going to go through with the interview process, but unfortunately my availability changed. I couldn't interview with them. So the header is located at the top left of the cover letter, and it usually includes your name, your email address, and your phone number as like a minimum. Your address is optional. It can be like a full address, including like streets and zip codes and states, or it could just be the city and the state. I prefer not to put my address. The greeting is like the salutation, we would say, like, would we say dear Mr. or Mrs.? But those are quite outdated and we don't use them as much these days, especially to whom it may concern. So instead of using Mr. or Mrs., we're going to lean towards using dear. And if you can find the name of the hiring manager, use that. Or if you can't find the name of the hiring manager, just say dear hiring manager. Or it could be like dear HR director or hiring team, but don't use these more outdated ones. For the introduction, this is more so just to introduce yourself, why you're applying for the role you are applying for. So make sure you name the role and then express your interest towards it. If you were referred to the role by someone else, maybe include how you heard about the role that way and have your background. So I'm a mechanical engineering undergraduate at Cal Poly Pomona, so that was my background. And then what you've recently done is like, what you've done recently. For here, I put, I did a manufacturing systems process class and some engineering clubs that I was part of. And when I say to map out my qualifications, I'm introducing what I'll talk about in the next paragraphs. So the manufacturing class, the 2 clubs, I'm going to talk about them in the next few paragraphs. So I'm introducing them right now. And then how the role relates to what you want to do next is kind of similar to why you're interested in the role in the first place. So I've done these things in the past, and now I'm moving on to trying to get an internship in the manufacturing industry since I find that interesting. There we go. And then the qualifications is basically the paragraphs that come right after your introduction. This can be 1 paragraph, it can be 3. It just depends on how you want to break it up specifically. So you're just going to further elaborate on what you mapped out in the first intro section. So, the skills and where they were used. So my first one was a manufacturing processes class, and I was learning about lean manufacturing essentially. And then you're going to add in keywords from the application. So this was for a manufacturing intern position, and some of the keywords they had was, optimizing systems. So what I used in this example was, continuous improvement. I used quality output, cost savings. WIP means work in progress tasks. Essentially, you want to minimize those so you don't have just parts laying around on an assembly line. Kaizen is kind of it's lean manufacturing, but it's a Japanese application of it, and it had spread around. And then the last thing is use metrics where possible. In these two, I didn't use any metrics, but if you can say you were working on a project and I improved the aerodynamics of a vehicle by 15%, and then include the numbers, that'd be good. And then for the second paragraph, I was talking about Hyperloop, this club, and then another club I'm part of, which is the Formula Electric at school. And I was specifically citing soldering and MIG welding, mainly because I would see those related to manufacturing. And then a little bit about how to design for manufacturing, since that is an important part of engineering, not just designing something to be done, but how to simplify it so that it can be manufactured easily and keeping the manufacturing processes in mind. The next part of a cover letter is a closing paragraph. So this one's optional to where you can place it, and that's a thank you. Some people put it in this last paragraph, or they put it instead of sincerely at the bottom. It really depends. A lot of times for like cover letters and resumes, it's all what you kind of want to do and how you want to work with it. But for mine, I used a thank you for reading and their time and consideration. And then what else I included in my application. So the resume, and that's mostly because it has more details on skills and experiences. You want to reiterate the interest in the role and the industry. And then a call to action is basically when you want to prompt them to do something. So mine was don't hesitate to reach out with questions, as I would gladly answer them. So for the signature, this is towards the end. You can use things like sincerely, respectfully, or thank you if you want to put it here, but don't use things like, warm regards or like best wishes, because that might sound a little bit too informal. With cover letters, we want to sound a bit formal. And then you want your signature as in cursive right here, especially if you're going to print this out and do a hard copy of it, or you can just use your printed name. I like to do both. And then just a point to make with cover letters is use a font that's standard, Times, Arial are two of my favorite. So a little bit of a Q&A with Alex. So let me bring you up. When you were applying around for, I guess, in engineering internships or even jobs, did you fill out cover letters for every application? And like, how important were they?
So I was pretty lenient on my cover letter stuff. I had a pretty basic template where I would really only change my first paragraph to go according to whatever that job was. So like for one, I'd say like, oh dear. And then for me, I would just say the company name, because sometimes you really don't know who ends up reading it. Sometimes it's HR, sometimes it's a hiring manager. So I just did that to be a little bit safer. I think for templates I looked at, that's what they use. So I stuck with it. And kind of how Manshaa said where you sectioned it off, my first paragraph was kind of just explaining, my first sentence was first what role I was even applying for. Anyone's reading it's gonna want to know, I guess, why you're even writing this. So I would say kind of just introduce myself a little bit, say my name, what I was applying for, some of the things that I liked about the job that they posted. And then I put just some kind of more general things saying, I think I would be a really good fit for your company because of A, B, and C. And I would change that up based on, again, whatever they asked for. And by doing that, I also put a lot of their keywords. So if one was specifically going over like electrical design, I'd say I'm really interested in the electrical design part. And then the rest of my stuff was explaining the work I did in Hyperloop and the work I did in my senior project. And I kind of left it at that. I don't know, honestly, I applied to so many jobs where I really kind of just threw the cover letters out because I didn't really have too much of an idea of what I wanted to do. So I was really open. But two people did reach out saying that they did like my cover letter. So if you want to put in the time to do it, I'd say why not? It kind of shows that you're willing to put in a little bit extra. But there was definitely a few I didn't really feel like putting a cover letter, so I didn't. So it's really just up to you, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and then just any questions from the audience at this point, just specifically about cover letters? question?
I guess I would like to know, just for, I guess, in case it happens, like, because I mean technically I'm not sure about where exactly I will end up eventually. So how would, I mean, how would it be like, because I'm assuming for cover letters, when you try to present yourself, usually you might be in like a case in which you're kind of like shooting a bit more than what you're expecting, like, like say like aerospace, right? Technically I don't know anything about it, but I have my technical knowledge. So how would I make it work necessarily, or how should I go about it if that's the case?
I mean, for me, what I really notice is a lot of people, when you go in, they really don't care too much what your knowledge is. I don't think I wrote a letter for the current job I have in aerospace, but it's really just pushing yourself out there. It's kind of the way you want to think about it is, for whatever you want to work, even if it is aerospace and you don't have what you think are the qualifications, say what technical skills and what skills you do have. Because when you're in the interview stage and any stage a part of the interview, you're going to be really just pushing yourself. So write it in a way that you think best pushes yourself, and also make sure that what you're writing about in your cover letter, you're, especially technically, you'll be prepared to answer a lot of very detailed and technical questions for. So I would just say kind of push yourself, I guess, because when I'm writing mine, I really push myself of, I use a lot of I, saying like, I would be a good fit, or I will be a good fit, and this is why. So I more pushed why I would be a good fit for them. So I don't know how well that works, but that would be my advice, is to kind of just push yourself, push your skills. And because even if you don't get the interview, because sometimes they kind of just read the resume, read the cover letter, and that's all they get from you. But again, 2 pieces of paper isn't too much to really say what you are and explain the kind of person you are. So you'll want to, I guess, just push yourself the best you can in that cover letter. I don't know if that was helpful, but
No, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I just want to add that when doing applications, they're not looking at just what you know, but how much you can know. Like, what's the potential of you learning more? Because for most jobs, you don't know like their internal processes and operating procedures. You'll have to learn that anyways through like training. And Alex, would you say that's true when you came into Safran?
most definitely aerospace, kind of the same thing Raphael said. I wasn't even really looking to go into aerospace, but that was probably the topic I knew the least about. But for the people that I've talked to since after my interview, said that I seemed like a good fit for how willing I was to learn and how open I was to learn. Because I even told the people who interviewed me, I know nothing about aerospace. I just thought it was cool what you guys did. And I guess they really liked how open I was. So it's because you'll really be starting from almost zero. I've heard this saying a lot, is you learn maybe 5% of what's out there in school, and then it's up to you to kind of be able to learn, because all the companies want is for you to learn. If you can't learn their processes and learn how to function with and just adapt within their company, then they're not really going to see any value in you anymore. So just, I guess, be open-minded and just willing to learn like anything that they throw at you.
And then just to add, Chris says in the chat that if you're an electrical engineer working in more of the aerospace industry, you're called an avionics engineer. Okay. Any other questions from the audience? You can type in the chat. You can unmute yourself. If not, I'm going to share my chat. No, we're going to go back to the slides. Okay. Now we're going to move on to resumes. So for resumes, just some general points before we get into section by section. The goal is essentially to get noticed by recruiters if you're giving them in person. Since they're not going to spend too much time looking at your resumes, apparently the average time a recruiter spends looking at your resume is about 6 to 10 seconds, and you have to catch their attention really quickly. And then also to get noticed by the ATS, which is the applicant tracking system. It's more of a software system that looks at your resume, it scans it for certain keywords. So we want to get noticed by that. Also try to keep it 1 page long, unless you have, maybe you're an expert and you have like 30 years of experience, then you can maybe make it 2 pages. But as students, most of us, all of us are students or recent graduates, we should have 1 page long resumes. Also no pictures. We just want to keep it, I would say, neutral. That's why I like the black and white, clean look. It's more optimized for the ATS. And then here we have an example of my resume over here. This is quite an old one, so not as totally updated. And then this is Chris's. We'll see in the next slide. Oh, I don't know why the slide didn't show it, but we see here that this example is 1 page and there's no pictures, black and white, but I am using things like, capitalization, bold, underline, italics to differentiate different types of information. So the contact info goes right at the top. It should have your name, your address. Again, this can be just your city and state, as both Chris and I have here, or like a full address. You also need your phone number and your email. It can be your educational email, but personal email is probably better since school emails do get turned off after a while. And then you can have your LinkedIn or personal portfolio link. I believe when you have a PDF and you print it out, they can't click links, so maybe just have it written out. And then to separate things, you can use this horizontal bar or this dot or any other way you like it. Again, resumes are very customized to how you would like it. And then on Chris's, you can see that he includes a US citizen. This is important for certain companies like, the aerospace or the defense industry, where you need to be a US citizen to have work authorization and security clearance too. So the next section is the education section. Since we're students and recent graduates, we'd probably want this at the top. If you've been working in industry for a few years, you can move it to the bottom since it's not as important anymore. So you'd want the full name of your school. So for us, that's California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. It's not Cal Poly Pomona. And we'd include the city of the school towards the right over here and state. And we need the full name of degree. So we'd say Bachelor of Science, Mechanical Engineering, and you'd want your graduation date too, which I put right here. And I did month and year for this one. You can also put just expected if you want to do it, or if you have 2 degrees, you can say graduated this month, this year, and then expected for a different one. And then your GPA should be on a 4.0 scale, and you can have an awards and honors section if you have additional ones you'd want to add. And then here's 2 examples. For the experience section, which is the biggest section of your resume, your experience can come from quite a few places. It could be from clubs, a research assistant role, a volunteer role. Personal projects are acceptable. Academic projects, such as if you were working on a class project. Work would just be a job, and internship is also a job, but you can classify them separately in sections. And then course is just if you've taken maybe, online courses on it, or it's an actual course that you took at school. And then each experience should have the organization / name and the location. So that means, so this is for clubs. I have CPP Hyperloop. That would be the organization or the name of the club. And the location is Pomona, California. We also want the title of the role that I was in. So I was a design team member last semester, and the dates I partook in it. So this was from January 2022 to present. And then we're going to have 2 to 3 bullet points summarizing your impact. And then for the bullet points, we always want to start with an action verb, meaning this is not something like, yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was gonna say, but action verb, meaning I can just show you examples. Every bullet point starts with a verb and it's in past tense. So designed, verify, reached, prepared, consolidated, executed, and so on. But for action verbs, don't use like a thesaurus and put very, I would say, words that someone wouldn't know what they mean, because that would just make your resume harder to read. We want resumes to be easy to read and effectively communicating what you have done. If you use a very complicated word, someone doesn't know what that means, that might hurt you more than help you. Also, if you're going with past tense, if it was in the past, it should be in the past tense. And then if it's in the present, it can be in the present tense, but keep it consistent. And another formatting thing is if you're going to have periods at the end of each bullet point, have it for everyone. I chose not to have periods at the end, so I don't have any periods anywhere. These little formatting things do make a difference. Also notice that every date and location are lined up. So that's something you can do when you're formatting it. And another thing to include in your bullet points are keywords from the application, meaning if the application says qualifications have experience with SolidWorks, somewhere in this section, I wrote SolidWorks, and I have that here. Another thing that could have been listed is like, Word or PowerPoint or, CATIA, any of those, or PCB design, Altium. All those can be integrated into these bullet points. And then this is an example of Chris's resume. So again, we see the name and location. His role is right here, and then when he worked that role. This one is written in the present tense. So instructing, upgrading, then created, facilitating, spearheading. These are all action verbs that we like to see. Another thing to note is the numbers. Almost every bullet point has numbers or metrics. So class of 28 students, you want to quantify your impact, not just say, oh, I instructed a class. The question is, okay, how many students were in that class? How much did you improve it in percentage? And then skills, you can put this before your experience or after your experience. Again, this is a custom choice that you can make, but there's a few things you do want to include, specifically technical skills. So that would be, lab view, Onshape, soldering, MIG welding. And then you can integrate those throughout your bullet points. If it was included in the job description, if they're just ones that you learned, but they're not really part of the job, you can put them in the skills section. Now, this could be controversial, this could not be controversial, but I don't like to write soft skills and list them down, mostly because I don't see how one can just list team player and then expect a recruiter to believe that. I think it's better to integrate them throughout your bullet points. So let me go back to my example. Right here, it says led a team of 20 students. This shows that leadership skills, and it shows that you can work in a team. Another here, collaborated with 3 sub-teams. That also shows teamwork, instead of just saying in the skills section, oh, I'm a team player. Another thing to note is if there's space, this is optional, not needed. You can add an interest section. This is just maybe you can potentially bond with the interviewer to take it past just a professional thing and see like, oh, it's also humanizing them in a little bit. So I have, some of my hobbies that I like to do. And then if there's space, you can add an other activities section. And that is stuff that didn't make it to my first experience section. So that was like CPB Hyperloop secretary, SAE secretary, and then my dance dude that I was part of. And then if we want to look in Chris's ones, he only has technical skills listed. This is great. And then it's also including like a skill level. So advanced, proficient, intermediate, and beginner. And then it's 4 bullet points. And then each bullet point specifies which skills he was either advanced and what skill level he had. So there's quite a few listed here. And then this would be really good for an ATS syntheses all of these as keywords that were on a job description. But one thing to keep in mind is sometimes this says MS Office, I have it listed, and then Chris has it listed as Microsoft Office Suite. Oh, the ATS will do it based off whatever the job description is. So if it says, Microsoft Office Suite, maybe put that. If it says MS Office, write that instead. Or if it just says, Microsoft Excel, write that. Because the ATS is, of course, a software. It's not a human. It can't really differentiate the differences between those small things. Okay, now back to Q&A time with Alex. So just a question, Alex, did you optimize your resume for each application? How is that? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I actually had the exact same resume for every single job I applied to. My resume, I think, captured all of my skills and everything I could do, I guess kind of regardless of what the job says. So for me, I just built like a solid one and then use that same application for every single one. One tip I do have, I don't know how accurate this is, but I have a friend at USC who's a little bit familiar with how that resume reading system works. And he did say, because I used to have a resume that was dual column, and he said that sometimes those systems have trouble reading like something with multiple columns. Like if you try to do everything just like like two straight up and down columns, it might not read it as well. So to keep it like the examples you guys had, that was very just like top to bottom, everything just there, no columns put in. Um, but yeah, but other than that, literally what you guys had, I have literally that exact same format from my resume. So I have school, clubs I participated in, skills, and then work experience. That's how I formatted mine, because my work experience for me didn't feel that important compared to the projects I'd done in school and the technical skills I have. So for me, I put work experience on the very bottom and focused the top more on what I've done in school and what I've done in clubs.
I'm just wondering, so would you say if you have extensive club experience, maybe like internship or work experience isn't as important?
I think it depends. I personally never really did any electrical engineering related internships. So, but if I did, I probably would have put that below, or I think I would have put that maybe between clubs and technical skills, because clubs are probably for school the main thing you're working on and learning. That's what you would kind of say is the specialization that you're doing, because a lot of companies kind of assume that schools teach you a very, like, you end up graduating with like a specialization in something. So I know Cal Poly Pomona doesn't really have that, at least for electrical engineers. So for me, I kind of put what would have been my specialties when I talked about the club things I did and projects that I had done, and just very like short format. I just like kind of stated what I did. And even for the classes, I didn't specify what classes exactly, but I took for me the classes that I wanted to work in the field of. And those were the main ones I put for school for classes that I had taken. So I wasn't really too interested in doing anything related to power of a so-called Edison standpoint. So I didn't mention classes I took with transmission lines. So I omitted that to more focus on stuff I'd done more on the electronic side, because I wanted that to be what I worked in. So I say it's kind of up to you how you want to do it, but the format you guys had is really good. But mine basically follows that.
And then just wondering, any questions from the audience about general resumes or something that you have on your resume that you'd like to ask about? Question is, how do you list changing roles within a club, job, or organization? Actually, I think Chris had an example of that on his resume. So let me quickly share my screen again. And desktop on share. So if we go back to here, ooh, maybe it isn't here.
Oh yeah, it's on the
It's Hyperloop.
Yeah, it's on Hyperloop. You can put the organization and name first, and then your role, and then put your bullet points, and then just go straight into your second role. You don't have to rename the organization because that would be a little bit repetitive. And also, line space is money, basically. You know how people say time is money?
Yeah.
Space is money on resumes. Pack as
really
much
is.
information as you can, but of course make the font at least 12, 11, and simple font. Don't put like 8-point font, otherwise they can't read it and they might just not look at it. What else? Maria, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I have a question. How will you do your resume if you don't have experience, or I'm sorry, you don't have any projects done, or internship that you have done, like a pretty much classes? What would you do? What would you say?
So I think one thing you could do, I'm assuming you'll probably be doing a senior project, so that would definitely be a project to add because we have to take that anyways to graduate at Cal Poly. So that would definitely be something that you would put. So you would say whatever maybe the title was of your senior project or what it dealt with, and then talk about your key or the key things you did in that project. So if you focused more on the power side, I would really talk about what you did on that. So that would kind of fill in some of those, like if you didn't have club experience, you would kind of be using that same train of thought of this is, instead of this is what I did in this club, this is what I did on this project.
Okay. Do you think also that, any lab activity, like like core classes, like hyper classes, that also counts or not?
I put some of that stuff for projects I did. Like, I think in one of the power classes I took, one of our end labs was a giant, like transmission line power systems project. So I mentioned that when talking about, because for my resume under school, I had projects that I had done in classes as well. So I'd done like Chris, what one that Chris helped me with was in a Raspberry Pi Arduino RC car. I think he might be going to get it, but I mentioned that I think I just have it as what I labeled that project. I just put it there. But I have like 3-phase power systems design simulate 3D printed robotic hand using RF sensors. And for me, that was my senior project. So that's how I implemented it. And then I mentioned what Chris is holding, the multifunctional, autonomous, and semi-autonomous tank bot. So you end up doing a lot of what you would consider mini projects in a lot of the classes at Cal Poly. So if there was one that you really, really liked, which one was your senior advisor? I had oh, I'm blanking on her name. I call her Pern. She's the robotics professor. So I gave the idea of my own project and asked her if I could do it, and she said yes. Yes, Pernalette. But yeah, just if you want to if you need to like fill space in your resume and you want to do a project, just to really like explain I would say on a technical level, and maybe what you did also as a teammate, because when this is kind of later, but towards the interview stage, it's both technical and how you work as a team. For a lot of the interviews I had, those are the two main topics that we discuss. So really show your technical side and how you work with others as a team. Because almost everything, at least for me, that I do is very team oriented. Everyone has their own little role to finish the main project. So I would say if you're mentioning your project, mention technical and how you worked with people. Like if you were a lead, mentioned the things you did as a lead and stuff like that.
Thank you. So I have one last question. Like, for instance, we're having a workshop next week, which is the Arduino workshop. So would that count, if I put that in as a, something that, like a little project or something in my resume?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would, especially if while you did the workshop, you learned like a couple key skills or even in general how something worked. Because the reasons we even do projects is to learn how something works. So if you want to mention that project and say, yeah, like I took this workshop with TPP Hyperloop, and I built this and this is what it does. But just maybe be prepared if you're, I, one thing I would say is anything you mention on your resume, be prepared to explain it on a technical level or just be able to explain it in general. One of the interviews I had, I got grilled on every single thing on my interview they asked about. So whatever you put on there, I would just say be very prepared to be able to answer anything that they ask on that. So anything you put on there, just be comfortable with talking about.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah, I would like to add actually, these workshops are actually a really great resume, a thing to put on your resume if you like have barely anything. The reason being these workshops are kind of like an extension of your regular classes, but they do offer you hands-on technical skills that aren't offered in like ECE labs. For example, you don't learn soldering in ECE labs for some whatever reason. You got to learn those on like workshops that we host or any other clubs that host on campus, like soldering. Same for Arduino, like especially for next week's workshop, you can develop soft skills like leadership and communication because it will be a team activity, right? You're working as a team to solve the problem, which is getting this car to work. And you can also explain that it's a time crunch activity too, because you have to complete it in 1.5 hours. And this is all a very good information to show your skills to a recruiter or someone who's interviewing you. And so combine that with the hard skills or the technical skills you learn about Arduino programming, RC car driving, manual control, this thing, which I'm building right now, which is like wireless control, right? Wireless transmission of data. And then also you can move on to the autonomous control because we offer you follow-up projects to do with all your kits. Everything you've done since the beginning of the semester, if you've been attending every single one of our workshops, is really good to put on your resume, especially for getting like things like internships and even full-time jobs. Well, full-time jobs, you might need like more developed projects, I would say. So either just participate in the Hyperloop's full team. You can write projects that you've done in the labs, or you can write projects that you've done on your own or like in other groups as well. But in general, in conclusion, workshops that we host are good to put on your resume, and you should do it.
Thanks, Chris.
I like to add to that, like, where would we put that on a resume? I'd say you can put under club experience, probably. Write TPP Hyperloop and then list what you learned there.
I would be careful about that, depending on which type of resume you put down, because sometimes experience actually means like paid jobs and internships. So I have two sections on my resume, one for experience and one for projects. I would put that under projects instead, because sometimes they do quantify the change between those two. The exception is if the project you have is like takes up a whole large part of your time as a college student, like Hyperloop was for me, then you can put it under experience. But otherwise, keep it in projects until you get some like paid job that requires technical skills, then you can move it up to experience.
Okay, thanks.
And then also when doing your bullet points, make sure the bullets you're listing are things you actually did, not just the whole project, because then if you get grilled on your resume during your interview and they ask something that you didn't actually work on, that could be potentially detrimental to you. So make sure you're listing only things you worked on. So you can talk about them further.
Like Alex says, you have to be prepared to like really actually technically explain.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Your resume should be like an icebreaker, like a conversation icebreaker. Your interviewer should look at it and be like, "Oh, you did like computer vision or something. That's really cool. So what's up with that, And then you can go on and explain. Theoretically, it should be really easy to explain something if you've already done it yourself, right? Which is why, also it's a slippery slope if you write these workshops down, because if they ask you questions about what you learned from the workshop and you can't say anything, that's kind of an issue. Like, for example, if you attended the circuit analysis workshop and you wrote that down that you learned something about voltage regulation, and then they go ahead and ask you a voltage regulator technical question that you don't know how to answer, that might be a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So make sure you're like really certain that you know what you learned. Like if they ask you the question and you can say, oh, sorry, the workshop didn't cover this, but it covered a similar topic, which was like the LM317 circuit, then you can explain what you learned from that. And you can also say the follow-up workshop in the circuit construction workshop, we learned how to build that, right? And that shows that you know how to build a circuit, you know how to test the circuit, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all about how you can like shape the conversation to what you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll also add maybe a workshop that would be good to put on is soldering, or just put it down as a skill, especially if you learn something from it. So if someone asks you, do you know soldering? Do you know how to build circuits? You can say yes to that under your technical skills section.
Yeah, definitely. I learned a lot right there.
Any other questions from the?
Really quick, I have one more thing to add that in general will probably be very helpful. And also organizing, make a separate email for all your applications and everything you do. Let all your job stuff be filtered into one email, and it'll also help to not use your personal email for that, because if depending on where you go and how deep of a background check they do, anything related to that email that you gave them, they will look at. So I would like, for me, I made a completely separate email, and my resume has this email. Everything related to whatever I was looking for job wise was only put in that email. Because especially like I did a lot of Indeed applications, and I like signed up for this stuff to let me know when specific things popped up. So you probably don't want a bunch of notifications coming in your personal. So I would definitely recommend make a separate email for all your applying and job related stuff.
Yeah, question for that, Alex. Did you name it something specifically, or does it just look like a regular, I would say, email?
For this one, like I think my normal email is like AA Perez, but I formatted this one like my Cal Poly one. So like I think my old Cal Poly one was like alexandriap@cpp.edu. So I kept the Alexandria A or the Alexandria P because it just shows my full name there. And then I just have like a few numbers because the name was taken already. But I just have it as set as something that has my name on it. It's very easy to see that it's me especially if I'm emailing a company and like it's even just after an interview, them seeing my name already on the email lets them know that it's me. So maybe something similar to your CPP one. I just kind of like the format of it, so that's what I used.
I guess this is just is somewhat related to resumes, but also applying. You know those certain types of applications where you click apply externally, then they ask for your cover letter and resume, and then they ask you to fill it out everything again. So do you fill out the exact same stuff on your resume, like copy and paste, or do you change it?
I would usually copy and paste. Sometimes for the external ones, if I really didn't feel like doing it, I just wouldn't apply. Because if it was a company I didn't really know that much about, I didn't see it as too much of a loss. But that was kind of just me being lazy and not wanting to do it. But for the ones I did, I would just copy paste just from my resume, or a lot of them you can upload it and then it kind of autofills your resume for you. But it mostly just depends. I know for Raytheon, if you apply there, you can do that, but they save your information. So for them, if you apply to one and you keep the account the same, you kind of just have to keep applying to their jobs and all your stuff will be autofilled already. But that's just the one that I remember. But yeah, I usually just keep the resume because sometimes they ask you to attach it anyway. So it's like I just make sure that they match, or if they'll allow me. I think for some of them I maybe like added another like line or two just to like of stuff that I couldn't fit within a page of my actual resume. So it's kind of up to how much effort you want to put into filling out the application. I think I was sending out like 5 to 10 resumes a day, like when I finished school, but I was just trying to get a job in general. I didn't really care too much what the job was. So but that's just me though. I put in, I would say, good to minimal effort for looking for jobs, but it,
Totally. Did
yeah.
anyone mention your resume specifically during the application or interviewing process? What they liked, what they didn't like?
No, honestly, a lot of, because this might be for like the interview section, but basically every single interview I had, you will be interviewing with usually a hiring manager or a recruiter or whoever they have to kind of filter. And in that very first interview, it's only like maybe 10 minutes. And but that's the first time a lot of those people are looking at your resume. Like I probably like half my initial interviews, my resume says like for me finishing Cal Poly ending in May 2022, and almost every single one asked if I was done with school yet, which means they didn't read the resume. They're like looking through it as they go, because I would always have my resume pulled up because a lot of mine were over phone or through Zoom or something. And they would kind of just be listing up down my resume. Like Chris on his had U.S. citizen every single or I guess it would be considered more of the screening interview. They just ask, are you a U.S. citizen? Did you graduate? What are you interested in? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And it's just a little 10-minute interview, and then after that it determines whether you get a second one. And usually those second ones are the technical ones. So, but they definitely vary. The interviews that I got job offers for were 3-hour ones, and the one I ended up taking was one I did a 5-hour interview for. So but all of them just start with a screening, and it maybe takes them about a week or two after to get back to you. But I usually always followed up though and just sent them like an email or a call saying like, thank you for speaking with me, looking forward to talking to you again. But
Just wondering, is that U.S. citizen line important on a resume? Like, would you say like, or because some applications already have that as a separate question?
some do. It's up, if you have the space, you can put it if you want, but they usually just ask the question anyways, and I will just say like, yeah, U.S. citizen. But it's up to you if you want to put it on there. I mean, when I was applying, I didn't know that was like a thing that was asked very often, and I think every screening I had asked me that. So if you want to make it a little easier for your recruiter, like maybe that first line after you have like because for me, like under my name, I have like the line kind of how Chris says with the separations of like my like the city I'm in, my email, my phone number, my GPA. Like I think if I could go back knowing what I do now, I maybe would have just added US citizen after, just so it's already there. So maybe when that screening goes through, I maybe would have gotten picked more for having the US citizen part kind of already put there. But if you have the space, I'd say why not put it? It makes maybe for the hiring person talking to you a little bit easier, and like you get maybe a little more time to talk about yourself before that like 10 to 15-minute window closes.
Mhm. And then I think you mentioned this before about like mentioning teamwork in with the bullet points. So would you put that towards like your skill section too, like as a soft skill, or like I know I said it was controversial to add some soft skills because how do you really prove that, I'd say, versus hard skills you can kind of, technically be interviewed on.
Yeah, for me, because I was like I was power lead for Hyperloop, I was also VP and treasurer at one point. So I more talked about the leadership stuff. So after I talked about all the technical stuff, I had a line just saying what I did as power lead, just saying like I would send out like daily or like weekly reports for what my team needed to do for the week. I'd schedule our meetings, just like stuff like that. And then the other club I mentioned was IEEE, where I also just mentioned like all the stuff I did as a treasurer and in general. And then I honestly, the way my resume is for my skills, I needed like 3 to 4 more lines to make it look symmetrical. So I added those soft skills. So like talked about task delegation, like, or I just said I delegated tasks. So I added a soft skill of task delegation and organization. So I mostly just added those again for if no one read my resume and it was going through that software, I wanted to put some of those keywords in there because I had the space to. So I said, might as well. But come interview time, they kind of just asked more just how I worked in a group, or a lot of them would be like, oh, can you tell us just a little bit about your experience working with others? Like, or as a leader, like, how did you take the leadership role? How did you work with others, basically? So it just, I don't know if it really does anything, but I just added them because I felt like it. But again, the resume is always going to be tailored to you. Even looking at someone's like exact like template, you're always going to make yours a little different based on what you have. So whatever you think puts what you want to, I guess, what you want to push yourself to show. Because for a lot of the times, even like when you're first interviewing, a lot of those people are reading your resume for the first time, or they've maybe briefly glanced at it. So while they're interviewing you, that's what they're using to ask questions. They have some of the questions that are basic, like, oh, what did you do in school? Like, what did you like? What are you looking to do? But everything other than that is them reading your resume top to bottom and asking questions based on your resume. So all the questions I got asked that were resume based were very top to bottom of how I had it laid out.
And then, like, what type of, I guess, hard skills did you put on your resume?
Like the
electrical engineering.
Yeah, so like Chris had, I said I put like the proficient novice of, like, I'm proficient in microcontrollers. So I said proficient in microcontrollers and mentioned the microcontrollers I've worked on. I'm pretty novice in coding, so I put novice and then some of the coding languages I know. I use a lot of MATLAB and Simulink, and a lot of applications, a lot of them, a lot of places use MATLAB and Simulink that I was kind of surprised of. So if you've worked on either, I definitely would recommend putting those in your skills. Even if you're not super confident, you can just say, like, even if you use it in class, I would say that's good enough for novice. I, again, for power team, we worked on a lot of like high and low voltage power systems. So I mentioned that. I also have Microsoft Office, soldering, 3D modeling and printing. And then the soft skills I have were task delegation and organization, communication and leadership, budget allocation and creation, and then critical thinking and problem solving. So my hard skills were more all the technical stuff I knew, and then soft skills were kind of just little extra things I put into mine. But for me, I mostly just added them because of how my resume is formatted, and I just wanted it all to look nice. But if you have a lot of hard skills that you can kind of differentiate, I would definitely just kind of like kind of how you said, the line space is very, very precious in a resume. So you want to try to condense everything, but also add as much as you can. So it kind of just depends. Mine has like a weird like basic line, and then I have like 2 columns for like skills. But my first column is like the important ones, and the second column is more soft skills, I'd say, or more basic skills. But I would definitely have, I guess, for the hard skills, just mention any technical skills that you're comfortable with talking about. Because again, depending on who or where you go, like I had a few that lightly run over the resume, and I had one that was like a 2 to 3 hour one that I got nitpicked on every single thing, which was good because after that I probably knew my resume like way, way better because I made sure I knew how to answer all those questions. But definitely you will learn from every interview, and every interview after will become easier and easier because they all kind of follow that same questioning and pattern. So the first one might be a little nerve wracking, but everyone after that will be pretty consistent.
And I guess this is more of a formatting question, but did you use templates like from online? Because I know like sometimes when you search up Google and you Google a resume, you get like these intricate, colorful pictureful, multi-column designs, I'd say.
Yeah, I actually have one of the word templates. It's one of I picked kind of the most basic one that I could kind of play around with and control the margins a little more because I'm not that well versed in Word to do that myself. So I I don't even know what this one is called, but it's a very basic one that already had everything laid out for me. So if you want to use a Word one, I would definitely use the most basic one you can find. That's what I did. Or you can try typing it out yourself. But I would I would say the more basic it is, the better. You don't want it to have like you don't even need it to have like pictures or anything fancy on it. You just want it to have the information that you want to share and that you want to talk about and are comfortable with talking about.
Yeah, and as for templates, I'm dropping a link in the chat. It's essentially I would say like company that helps you with your resumes and cover letter and interviewing, but they have a really nice template. It's the one that I was using. Um, and it's very, simple. It's ATS friendly, and you can essentially just take the resume, download it, and replace it with your information. And then, of course, you can edit it a bit. And that's just a link to the actual site. You can find the resources somewhere, and I can probably send that link with the YouTube video under the helpful links section. And then any other questions about resumes from the audience before we try to move on?
Um, so I guess I just wanted to, I wanted to see how you think about, or I mean, you technically talked about it. It was like skills. So so yeah, so like let's see. Well, how would you like prove a skill necessarily? As in like how would you like explain it? Because like I guess how I'm doing it so far, I say, okay, I got an understanding of this concept, or like I generally know how I would go about how the applications of this, right? So how would I, yeah, I guess just to make sure, how would I make sure I'm giving my skills the best explanation that it deserves?
On paper form or like if you were talking about this skill.
Both.
So you or I guess you give me an example of like one skill that you would want to put on your resume.
Uh, Coding.
Coding. So you would say whatever. So I would recommend on your resume on the soft skills, say, let's say you're intermediate at coding. So you would put intermediate and then instead of putting coding, put the languages that you've worked on. Or let's say you're pretty intermediate with like Java and C, but Python you're novice. So you can put those on the same line or make two different lines for it depending on how your resume's done. But usually they would ask like, oh, like you've done like for me, a lot of my novice coding experience came from one of my jobs. So I would relate it back to my job. But but I did coding a little bit for one project that was very minimal. So they would say like, oh, like what did you use C++ for? So I would say like, oh, I wrote the code to make the tank I was working on to make it move forward or to follow something. So be able to relate that skill like to a project or just in a way to explain it, because I had one or two interviews that I brought in my actual senior project because I had it with me. So I was able to like more physically show them the skills. But one interview I had told me to not bring anything because they wanted me to be able to explain in words, or I guess be able to clearly explain it in my own words how I used the skills that I learned, because a lot of the times, especially where I work, you really have to be able to explain like for me, because I work with mainly MEs, they know almost nothing about the electrical stuff. So if they ask a question to me or anyone on my team, someone on my team has to be able to verbally explain what's going on. in a way that's easy for an ME to understand. So I would just say for whatever skills you have, figure out a way to put it on your resume in short form. But if you're asked about it, because they're the ones that will usually ask you, you won't have to be like, oh, like I did this, this, and this. They'll either ask, oh, like looking at the skills, why do you think you're maybe novice in this, or why do you think you're intermediate in this? Or if they ask the questions about your projects, you can correlate the coding you did on your project, and then that kind of, it already kind of matches with your skills then. So if you're working on like a project for, like for me it was a robotic hand, and if I did coding, I'd say, oh, I did the coding to set A, B, and C, and I've already then talked about that skill, if that kind of makes sense. So I guess just figure out how to make all the connections to all of it if they ask. Just connect it to something.
Chris says in the
Right.
chat that he
Thank-
wouldn't say coding, and it's a slightly less appealing connotation. Programming could be better. Also, I think if you specify the language, it'd be more specific, because some jobs require specific languages. But of course, if you're showing you're willing to learn, if you know one coding or one programming or coding language, you can apply those same concepts to other ones. Yeah. Okay, and then any other questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to share my screen again. No, we're going to move on to onto the interviewing section. So this will probably be the longest one, since we'll have a little bit of an activity going back and forth with the audience on how they would answer things. So the first one, just in general, we want to research the company and its values before we do the interview. So you've submitted your resume, you submitted your application, you got a call back for an interview. Now we want to really dive deep and research into it. So if they were to ask you specifically, why do you want to work for that company, you'd kind of know what the values are and can explain it. You also want to know why you want the role specifically, like what interests you in it, what are you excited to learn about it, what do you know about it, and what further can you learn about it. And then you want to practice with some common questions that are almost always asked. As Alex said before, the common ones might be in the screening interview, but really don't try to memorize scripts, as if you're scripted, it's a bit obvious when someone's scripted. And then one resource I have linked here is Big Interview. This is through your CPP email. You can just click on the link, it'll take you to the site, log in with your CPP email, and it gives you interview questions that they say through a video, and then you respond back and it records you, and then you can see how you answer it. And then on here, the right side, we have some of the common interview questions. Tell me about yourself, almost always asked. Usually greatest strengths, weaknesses are always asked too. How you made a mistake, when you had a conflict at work, are really commonly asked too. The next thing we want to talk about is the tell me about yourself one, since it's asked maybe 99% of the time, probably 100. So we can structure answers just a little bit in different ways. One way is like a 4-part answer where we have an introduction, then we followed up with some relevant experience, previous experience, and then the skills that are applied to that relevant experience, and what I would do outside of work or school. So an example would be, hello, my name is Manshaa. I'm a second-year mechanical engineering student from Cal Poly Pomona. I've had previous experience in product design and structural analysis, experience from academic projects and clubs. From these experiences, I've learned SolidWorks and ANSYS and feel comfortable with not only the software, but with the design process and how to set up analyses. And outside of school, I really enjoy reading, dancing, motorsports, and making custom 3D printed table organization products. So just taking you through that, I specified, my year in case they're interested in knowing that. Where the location's also specified a little bit with a college. The type of things I've done, product design that I did, I think for my senior project in high school, and structural analysis that I'm kind of learning right now, analyzing a chassis for a car. And then the skills, you can mention just the softwares you used or just the general skills. So I said SolidWorks, but you can just say, 3D modeling in CAD. And then I also specified that not only do I know the certain softwares, but I feel comfortable with the design process. And I said this because the stuff from SolidWorks can be transferred over to like CATIA or NX. So it's not really the software that's the hard part, but the idea of, okay, do I add something, do I subtract something? What type of features do I use? And those are quite similar throughout most 3D CAD modeling softwares, but a little bit changes on the user interference. So that's why I specified that. And the outside of work one is kind of just to show you have a little bit more personality than just working in school. But specifically here, I mentioned motorsports because that's going to further relate to the club I'm part of racing. Then I also said custom 3D printed parts because that shows I can, CAD 3D print. And then I have an interest in product development, which I personally do have an interest in product development. So just gonna stop right here to ask Alex to talk a little bit about how you answer. Tell me about yourself.
So most of my interviews were after I graduated. So for me, I would say my name is Alex. I'm a recently graduated electrical engineering major from Cal Poly Pomona. And that's kind of all I would say. I'd kind of just leave it at that. That's really kind of all they need. Usually after they would say like, oh, congrats. And then they would kind of move on to the questions of every screening's pretty similar. So next they'll usually ask something like, oh, like, how did you hear about us? And like, I would usually just say like, oh, I like saw it on Indeed. I like this, and this. Or like I usually before every interview, I'd go visit the company website because that's something they'll usually ask you. They're like, oh, like, have you looked at our website? And like, I think for one, I hadn't and I said no. I didn't get a call back from them. So I would say no, try to know at least like a little bit about the position and the company. Like even for some, like I would just brief and know like, oh, they deal with like aerospace, they deal with like electronics, or they deal with chip design, something specific. So definitely know basically who you're interviewing with. So and just know some of the basic things about them. But it's mostly just that for me, all the screening interviews are all about you. So it's more just asking like kind of just confirming some stuff like on your resume, like yes, you've graduated. What are you looking for in a job? Why did you apply here? Basic stuff like that. So I would, for me, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I would just tell them that. I'd say I don't really know what I want to do. I'm really open. And I just because there was one thing I didn't want to do, which is kind of what I mentioned, is what SoCal Edison does with more their larger transmission line stuff. I would just say I'm open to anything except for that. But I also didn't apply to anything that was related to that. So for me, it was just more about like I'm really just open to learn and do everything. That was my answer for like the question of like why I want to work there or what I'm looking for. Whenever they would ask, oh, like, what are you looking to get out of this job? And for me, I would always just say, I just want to learn something. I want to like be able to stay here and keep learning until I can't learn anymore. Because by the time you aren't learning anything, that's kind of your cue to go. Even now, like a lot of the people I work with are kind of like, yeah, after a few years, you'll learn enough and then you'll go move on and then the cycle kind of continues. But I would say definitely say something along the lines of that you're open to learning. Kind of as Manshaa said, that's really just what they're looking for. Someone who's open to learning and that can learn. That's their main thing, because if you're someone they can't train, or even like I would say one of I think the benefits that comes with kind of being a student or even like going into the workforce out of school is that you're not trained or hardwired to think a specific way or do things a specific way because we're still in that process of we're used to learning. So I would say very much play that of just you want to learn. Like that's definitely just say something related to that of you wanting to learn and also make sure you have questions for the end because always at the end they'll say, oh, like, do you have any questions for me? Always have questions for them. Ask even stuff of what, like, I think I would even ask most of mine, how did they, I would always ask 3 questions of, I always ask my interview how they liked working in their company, like what their favorite parts about it is, about the culture, all of that. Um, I would ask if they think that their environment produces a lot of like opportunities to learn and grow. And then I always ask for for them, I would say, what do they define success in their company for? Or something along those lines of just like kind of showing of what is their ideal of what they're looking for. Because you asking that, I think, kind of shows that you're willing to kind of fit and adapt to that mold if need be. Because when you hop into a new job, you'll very much be learning their processes, how everything in the company works. Like I'm 4 months into my job right now, and I'm still learning a lot of the processes. Like I work on stuff where I sometimes even have to go back because I learned how to do more stuff with it. So I have to go revisit and do that. But you'll always be learning, and I would just say very push that you're willing to learn
Mhm.
in whatever your interviews are.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that was really good. Thank you, Alex. And then any questions for the from the audience at this portion? Or like how would they want to say it? Or if anyone wants to volunteer to say, if I asked you, tell me about yourself, what you would say.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay, yes.
For the when you're asking them like the 3 questions, what's like a red flag versus a green flag when they answer what do they view as success and like the work culture?
Mm, for me, I'm very nonchalant and chill. So, but a lot of these people will push the goods of their company. So no one's gonna really say like I've had a bad experience here. I would say you probably get those red flag feelings by the time you get to the second interview because the first interview is not very personal. It's the screening. It's kind of to like filter you out because there was even a couple jobs that they didn't mention that they were looking for someone with a master's, but when I got there, or they were looking for people with the experience but didn't mention that, and I would get to the job and they would say, oh, like you don't really have the qualifications of what we're looking for because you're straight out of school. So after that process, I wouldn't say you get a very thick sense of whether there's a red flag or not, but definitely when you get to the second round or third round, because when you get to, for me, every interview that I did only had a second round. There was no multiple rounds that came after that. But for me, all the second round interviews would be with the people that I'd work with. And I mean, I honestly had good interviews throughout. I really only had one interview, and that was the one where I very got immensely grilled on my resume, where even after kind of meeting the people who I'd be working with and walking around the facility, I didn't get a very good feeling about it. So I would say that interview, because those interviews are anywhere between well, for me, 5 was the longest, but 1 to 3 hours that you'll be with these people. So I'd say you get a pretty good idea of how the company was. Like, I think that same company that I kind of had that ick feeling about, when I walked around the facility, there wasn't one girl in the entire building. So for me, that was a little bit of a red flag. Just for me, I it was kind of weird that there was only like men in that workplace, and the experience I had with the interview was was also not the best. So for me, that was kind of the red flag to be, I really don't want to work here. And it's kind of, I mean, you can always reject whatever offer letter, like if they want to reach out for a second and you don't want to continue, like it's totally okay for you to say I'm good, or say like, oh, like I have different opportunities I'm looking into. But the first interview, you probably, again, you won't get that, but second one you will. The first ones, I like those kind of screening ones that I asked are more to make me look good than to make them really look good. The kind of interview that's you with them and then with you, or because when you interview for that second round, it's also you interviewing them. That's probably when I also kind of grill them a little more on what their company is when I get to that second round, because that HR or recruiter person you're initially talking to probably doesn't know at all what you'll be working on. So you can ask them questions and they can say, yeah, you'll learn. But if they don't work on that team, they don't really know that answer. But yeah, I would just say you definitely get, again, you get that feeling on the second round of interview processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, if you have the opportunity, ask for that walkthrough of the facility so you can just see what your work environment would look like if you joined that company.
Almost all of them, that's kind of already part of the end part. You usually do your interview, and then for me at least, I would have my interview and then I would walk around the facility. So I mean, that's also probably a big thing. Like I had a friend who really liked the company, but after walking around the facility, she didn't like the facility, and that was the reason she didn't want to take the job. So if I would say maybe if they don't show you around and the reason is not because they cannot show you because it's government systems related or it's confidential, it's, I feel like, kind of hard to get a sense, and would be weird if they didn't offer you a tour after. That's kind of, I feel like, a given with most engineering companies. I feel like big or small, they'll, I mean, because they want you to work there. Like for me, where I work, they have like a whole nother building that has all like the lab stuff. So I got to go in there and like see like all their actuator, like test equipment, stuff like that. And like there was stuff they couldn't show me, but that's because it's like defense and government related. But you should, I feel like it'd be weird if you didn't get a tour. That's usually just part of the end part of the interview process.
Okay. And then just questioning for Chris, how would you answer this question? Because we're kind of going around as an activity now.
Yeah. Sorry, I was like down there working on something else, but I was here. And I've, as a personal opinion, I've been interviewed once, and that was my first ever like real job. It was on top of my resume, and it was for a teaching position. Now, here's the thing about interviews for like different positions, which I think it might be interesting to you guys. Generally, there are, I would group them up as like two types of interviews when you're working for like an engineering, or I guess three in my situation. The first one would be Alex's, which is the defense companies. That would be just general engineering. Usually you would either work in a defense company or what's called a big tech company. And big tech would be things like Tesla, Apple, Google, things that have a lot of interview stages. If you're into computer science, if you're into computer engineering, and you want to work into big tech, that's a whole other different story than what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about defense companies, in which in the US, that's why the US citizen name is so important. That's why you have it there. It's like why it's so important that they make sure you're a US citizen. But defense companies are a little more lenient in terms of interviewing than big tech companies, because big tech companies are usually private. They're privately owned, which means they have their own little financing situation, and they're a lot more selective than defense companies. The third type of interview, I would say, are like the teaching interviews, and then all the miscellaneous ones below that, like just for like general retail, general like just jobs that you would have during college. But teaching one is a special one because it's a really important type of interview if you're looking into helping other people learn. It's also really important if you want to get a job in college, because that's probably one of the easiest ones to get. I think Alex used to teach at a coding place. And a lot of college students do work at places where they teach younger children, like robotics, STEM concepts, programming concepts. And you can try to use those as kind of your preparatory interviews, I would say, in order to get a much larger job in a much larger position. So in my situation, I had my first interview with my teaching job, which I teach an autonomous driving course. And they asked me, describe yourself, or like they already knew my resume from the start because it's a more privatized, they more cared about me than like the actual job itself because it was helping students. So I didn't have to go through all this scrutiny. They already knew who I was. They already know my resume. So they asked me, exactly, tell me about yourself. And I was just like, okay, so I am Chris Lai. I am a computer engineering student at Cal Poly Pomona, and I am a second to third year student. So that was like 1 year ago. And, I really just ended off there because they already read my resume. But if I need to go any further, I would just start listing some of the qualifications I had for this position. So for example, this position required me to know some programming. So I would be like, I am moderately skilled at Python due to these projects I'm in. For example, Hyperloop, where I programmed a autonomous vehicle to run on a track for 50 to 60 miles per hour in order to improve high-speed vehicles and high-endurance vehicles. And I could say I also worked using programming in my UAV project, in which I had increased the endurance of drone technology and flight technology. Basically, start listing out things on your resume until you think it's enough, or you see that they're satisfied enough for you to stop. But in this case, I didn't say that because they already knew me. And then if you want to go down the list of that's slide 22 is really important once you get a chance to view it. You can just go down and do a full description of yourself if they ask for it. Otherwise, you don't have to go overboard, I would say.
Okay.
Did I cover enough, Manshaa?
Yeah. And then any questions from the audience? Or we'll be moving on. I think we're moving on then. So let me share my screen again. Okay. So yeah, this is more of a long one if they haven't read your resume, or if you just don't know if they read your resume. Oh, I can. Okay, there we go. We're next to the next slide. So we're going to cover some different types of questions. So like the first type of question you'll get is a behavioral questions. It's usually a prompt that's going to ask you to respond with like a story or an anecdote. And it's going to kind of test how you would respond in the role, and if you're a good fit. That says it, I meant fit. The answer can be laid out using this method called the STAR method. It stands for situation, task, action, and result. So you lay out this situation, then you say, oh, what were you specifically tasked with? How you responded to the task with an action, and then due to the action, what was the result? For example, in my electric vehicle racing team, I was tasked with analyzing the torsional rigidity of a chassis. So I went into ANSYS to set up the analysis. And then after analyzing it, our result was that our chassis would pass using the spreadsheet provided by the competition. So that's just a quick example I can think off the top of my head. And then above this picture right here, we see just a quick, not summary, just a few examples of questions they can ask. But of course, these questions, they can make it as specific as they like. So, can you describe a stressful situation, how you handled it? How do you deal with mistakes? How well do you perform under pressure? Have you ever dealt with a sticky situation involving another department? Or basically, have you ever had a conflict with another group of people or person, how you handled it? So now we're going to go back into a little bit of Q&A. So Alex, how many, I guess, where and like how much of your interviews were these behavioral questions? Was it the screening, technical? What do you think about that?
Those were always in the second round. So it kind of went after the technical I have. For the job I currently have, it was kind of just like I had a mini meeting or like introduction with the person who would be my now boss. And then I met with, because there's only 3 electrical engineers again, in my work, I'm the third one. So I then had a technical interview with the other two electrical engineers, and then a systems engineer. And then after that, they brought out two more program managers, which is the equivalent of what my boss is. And they then had like an hour interview with me, asking those questions of, have you ever like had any difficulties dealing with anyone? And like I've like we've probably all had someone in like a group project who doesn't do the work. Um, so those are good things to mention if you've never really dealt with that conflict. I've been kind of lucky where for my senior project, I kind of had a little conflicts with someone not doing work. So I mentioned that was like my most recent thing, and how I went about, for me, because this person didn't have a lot of skills. I really, for them, pushed to give them work to do so they could build those like technical skills. So that's what I told the interviewers. I said I related it back to my leadership in the Hyperloop, where I usually have to come up with stuff for my team to do for the week. So I use that same sort of thinking and giving someone in my group who doesn't really do work and maybe give them easier work, or kind of just mention how I dealt with like dealing with partners or like group members who don't do work. I would kind of just say I would try to get them involved, but in the end I could usually kind of do the work myself, and then would do the work. Or like, I mean, luckily with like Hyperloop, everyone when I was in it was pretty like was actively doing their work. So I would say like, oh, like with working with my team, and I would just kind of talk about what we did, how I would lead the meetings. So it's mostly stuff like that of just how you work in a team. It's very like how you work in a team. If you have a club, you kind of just say like maybe just how you work with the people in your club. If you're on a team, whether or not you're a leader or not, just maybe how you work with others. Even just saying like, oh, if I ever got stuck, I would always ask someone on my team for help, and vice versa. That would be a good answer to say. That shows that you're willing to ask questions to someone else, willing to like, it's more just the willing to work with others, which my job was pretty big on, because anything that like, there are so many times where I need an answer pretty quickly, and I will go walk to someone's desk and ask them that question. So as kind of just showing that you're more that you can communicate well. I think in that portion of the interview, their biggest thing was to just see like how your communication and teamwork skills were. And that's also where they kind of asked me like, oh, like what I think my strengths are, what I think my weaknesses are. And then I would like kind of list those off. Thinking of a weakness is always pretty hard though. So unless you kind of already have a set one, for me, I always said like getting better at like talking in like front of a group of people, because that's something that even now I'm still kind of working on. But of just like, for me, I would say that's a weakness where I sometimes just have troubles explaining something very concisely. But that I'm doing this and this to work on it. So I'd say that, or for me, like I have a really hard time saying no. So I'd say that's a weakness, but maybe in the workplace, you wouldn't consider it a weakness. So a lot of my weaknesses, I would then talk about how I'm either trying to make those weaknesses into more strengths, or just how I think those weaknesses may be a good thing. So, I mean, that's just how I went about it, but definitely it's very, that portion of the interview is mostly kind of just talking about you and how you are as a person and how you work with others.
And then just for like those strengths and weaknesses, what would you say? Like if I were to ask you that, like what did you list?
So I think for strengths, I said I'm a good team player and I'm willing to take on a leadership role if need be. For me, I'm pretty independent with work in general, so I'll try and figure it out myself, but I'm definitely not scared to ask questions. I think another strength that I put is I'm just willing to, well, that's where I said for them, I said for me, it's a weakness, but also the strength is I like will always say yes to anything because I think I can probably do it. but might not, but said it might be a weakness because if I don't really want to say no, could be a bad thing. And then I mentioned the part of where I'm working on more public speaking and just how I correlate with that. I don't remember those are, I think, what I said during the interview, but it's been a little while since that. But uh, usually you kind of, when you have the one interview where you kind of get through the first and second stage, a lot of the interviews kind of follow that. So that's why I kind of said after you kind of get through that first one, you have a good idea of how to go about answering or even how you want to answer kind of that process. I feel like every interview I went through and like the questions I was asked, it would always help me refine my answers or refine how I wanted to talk about things for the next interview that I would have. But the one thing I would also say is a lot of the interviews will be very far out from when you apply. Like I mean I have a job now and I think like a week or two ago I like got phone calls and like some emails saying like, oh, we would love to like interview you and like have a conversation if you're like still interested in pursuing. So a lot of places, even after that first interview, like I had a screening and they reached out to me like 3 months later for the second interview. So it's, I would say don't be too discouraged if after that first screening you don't get anything, because a lot of the processes people have to take a while, or even after you apply, the interview or even any kind of contact might come way later. But kind of just depends. That's more just like a be prepared for kind of thing when you are applying. Is there might be a lot of gaps in between you applying and anyone getting back to you on anything.
And then just one thing I want to mention is when we're talking about conflicts or questions about like, oh, how would you deal with a coworker that, wasn't doing their work? You would never want to say that something mean about them because, or is talk bad about them. You want to just say, what was your response to it and how you handled it versus, like just talking mean things about them. Or if the question was like why you left your other job, you wouldn't want to say like, oh, I hated working here, because that's not a good reflection onto you and how you would act as an employee for that company you're interviewing for. And then I think just like if I were to say a weakness, I'd probably say something along the lines of, yeah, I think I accept too many things, and then sometimes time management gets hard, but I'm working on that. And strength wise, maybe I'd say like, I'm reflective. Yeah, I can't remember the other ones off the top of my head, but reflective is one of the major ones, as I like to continuously improve on things. Okay, and then any questions from the audience on like how to respond to maybe like a specific question?
So I'm kind of curious for, say someone asks you like, for like if you like say you had applied to like another job or something, or like they ask you basically if you have any offers or like how much they're paying you and stuff, like that kind of sensitive kind of, yeah, that along those lines, how would I go about like thinking of like an answer per se? I mean, just what would you do?
So me personally, I actually the job I have now, I did that for because the job I currently have was the very last interview I had planned out before I was making a decision. I already had two other offers that I was kind of debating on, and the saffron job I have now was kind of the final, would kind of be determining which I would be choosing. But for me, because I already have offers, I feel like I was a little more nonchalant with that interview. And I told them straight up, mostly because I did need an answer ASAP. When talking in that very first, which for me, like I think maybe helped me get the offer I did with this company, is when the very first thing I kind of said after that initial screening with who my boss was, I said, I do want to be very like open and transparent with you that I do have other offers that I do need answers by, that basically need answers for the following week of a yes or no. And he was like, oh, okay. And then after I kind of had the other two interviews I had, when we talked again, he was like, yeah, so because I asked them also what their return time is, because some places are like a month and out, some might be a week. The offers that I got were, one of them was 2 hours like after my interview, they gave me a call saying, oh, we'd like to give you this offer for this amount of money. And for me, it was, that very first one was definitely a lot lower than I wanted, but it was also a smaller company. And then another one that I'd interviewed for, the day after, they called me with an offer, and that was a lot on the higher scale. So I let the person that I was interviewing know, I said, yeah, like I already have a pretty high paying offer for a job that I'm like considering. What's your turnaround time? And that day he told me 2 weeks out, and I said, okay, I need an answer basically by like next Wednesday, because I was interviewing on a Friday. And I mean, people I talked to said that was maybe a good thing, because it put me almost on a higher pedestal of, I have other offers and I'm highly valued. Because I definitely got a lot more than the previous company offered, and I did specify kind of like a range, and they definitely rose above the range that I mentioned. So I would say it might be like, it's almost kind of like a gamble to do so. I think, I don't know if I got luckier, because for the position I have now, I was the very last person they interviewed. So I didn't even think I would get the position because of that. But I think that me telling them that I had offers and kind of where the price range was for that offer really pushed them to make the decision, because the following Monday they were scrambling for it, but they were like, okay, we want to give you an offer. I didn't even get an offer letter, but they called me Monday night telling me kind of the conditions, and then I got the offer Tuesday. So for me, like, I think it helped, and it very pushed the fact of them wanting me, because they told me a 2 weeks out, they would let me know, and I basically got it 2 days after the interview. So I think it depends. I definitely thought that the interview with them for the job I have was probably I probably interviewed the best technically and like personally for myself at that interview, but I feel like it might have also been because I had other offers, so I was a lot more relaxed for that. But again, I think it depends. If you want to share it, I think you can if you want. For me, I think it put me at a higher value for them to want me, even though I probably wasn't as experienced. But I also did think I got a little bit of brownie points, because the two EEs that I work with both graduated from Cal Poly Pomona, and also like, that's also a thing. People love Cal Poly Pomona. I didn't think people really thought that our school was like that impressive, but have like the school that you guys are like going to does hold, like the name holds value, I would say. So definitely, I guess, like, be prepared for people to see like, oh, like, be impressed that you're there, and definitely push the technical things you've learned, because that's kind of what Cal Poly is known for. But overall, I'd say it's up to you. Maybe like feel out the vibe. I didn't outright start with that, but after kind of talking to the initial person, because I did want to let them know, because I did need an answer, which is for me why I said, like, I kind of gave them all that info and kind of left it up to them with what to do with it. But I don't know if I got lucky or what it was, but for me, mentioning all those things did very much work out for me.
Yeah. Okay. And
I don't
then
know if that helps.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, okay. That sounds good. So, but would you say like, because I mean, I guess you did mention the high offers, would just like, is one valued over the other? Like if I had like one part, like one opportunity or like one offer and it was a lot of money, and or if I got multiple offers, or is there like, what is there like something I should meet? I mean, because what, like say, technically speaking, like, right, I would like probably apply to like multiple ones, right? And then I would, get offers, and then at that same time I would have something. Is that recommended or?
I mean, for me, my parents very much like you might as well take the opportunities that they come. Like the very first offer I got, they wanted my answer the next day, but because I had other interviews planned out for the next 2 weeks, I asked if I could delay it for the 2 weeks. And they were kind of I didn't end up taking their offer because it was a lower one, but I would say definitely if you can compare for me, like the one that I ended up choosing in Irvine, I didn't have to move. The other offer I had was all the way in Santa Barbara, which would have required me to move. So I think it's situational if you're open to moving, because even the ones that I applied to did offer to pay relocation, but for the amount they were offering in the area, I didn't think it was worth to move. So that's also something to consider. Even because the offers I probably got the highest, like money wise, I didn't give them a value or a range. I kind of left it to them and I said, like, basically, what do you want to pay me? And I let them kind of set the range for that. And those ones I think gave me maybe a little bit more, but um, definitely check the area and maybe like how like if you're in a very like high tech area like LA, you would want to see roughly how much it would cost to live there if you had to move and about how much you would need salary wise to stay living there. So those are some things to consider for the offers because let like NorCal for a lot of the offers when applying that when they were like bringing up possible salaries, a lot of them in NorCal were higher, but it's more expensive to live up there in those areas. But like I had some that offered me less, but the area is cheap to live in. So it makes sense. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into it, but if you're really wanting to negotiate your salary, definitely know how much it'll cost to live in the area you're choosing if you kind of won't be living with your parents or something. Uh, but I mean, I'm kind of lucky my parents own the house that I'm currently staying in, so and I just pay them rent. Um, but if but if for anyone that's like looking to like move out on their own, you'll definitely want to make sure that you'll be able to afford that if you aren't getting additional financial help. So like you could get an offer for like 6 figs, but the area might be more expensive than that can kind of let you live, I would say, nicely on. So it really just depends. The offers will vary also on company size. The first offer I got was for a small company. Like they had only one office and there was 6 or 7 people working there. The ones that I got higher offers for had like whole buildings just for them and they had a lot of employees. So it's the smaller companies will probably offer you less, but you will probably get a lot more, I would say, hands-on experience because you'll be required to do a lot more work because there aren't as many people. But the larger companies might give you more, but you might learn at a slower rate, or there might just be there's kind of just more processes I feel like that come with the larger companies as well. So it's I would say all of that's very situational. Know kind of roughly if you're applying to somewhere in Irvine or NorCal, do a little bit of research on the area because I didn't do that till probably until I got the offers, and that's when I realized like, oh, like I don't think I can live in Santa Barbara on that salary. Like I probably could, but even just like taking the time to move, I didn't really want to do that. So just I would that's something I definitely wish I did, was kind of check this, like what salary I maybe should be asking for the area I'm going to live in, or asking if they pay for relocation, because some of them will give you maybe like 1 to 3K to help with relocation costs if need be, and some might even pay like whatever amount you need if they're a larger company. But again, it all depends where the company is, what the area is. That all kind of affects what your salary would be, or even what if you would want it to be. You might have to ask for a little higher. But I don't have experience asking for more. For the offers I got, I was very happy with, so I didn't feel the need to ask for more. Um, but I feel like I got offered a good amount where I'm currently am. So
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next section now, which is technical questions. So as Alex mentioned before, there's usually your first screening interview. The second interview is longer, more technical, and has behavioral questions. So for technical questions, of course, it's going to be based off what you're applying for. So if you're applying for an electrical engineering role, probably expect those type of technical questions. Sometimes technical questions can be 2 to 3 questions, and maybe if it was like a shorter screening interview, or it can be a multiple hour-long technical interview. For example, like Tesla and SpaceX have like, a multi-month long interview process, and they do like hours of technical interviews where it's like basically a case study or a test to see how you would tackle an engineering problem that they give you. So there's 2 resources that are linked here. One is like a site where there's questions for various industries. The top one is more a manufacturing based, more car type of based ME technical interviewing questions. Talks a lot about, like injection molding, I'd say. And on the right, we see some differences. 2 examples of technical questions. So the top one's ME about resilience versus toughness, and the bottom one's just about reverse polarity in electrical engineering. And then on our next slide, so we're going to talk about asking questions at the end of an interview. So it's more of an opportunity to understand the responsibilities of the role and how the company culture is. So I would say maybe have 10 questions that can potentially be asked ready before the interview, because some of them might just be answered as you go. So if you start off with 10, maybe only have 5 left that you can answer. And here's some examples, like how can a company help its employees grow professionally? How have people succeeded in this specific role in the past? What are your expectations from a new hire in the first 30 to 60 days? What do you most like about working with the company? There's anything else you'd like from me to help you make your decision. So that last one, and then something like, what could I have done better, are more, I would say, iffy questions, or more if you're confident. But with that, some other important topics are asking about the company dress code and dress up a little bit above what they say. If you can do that in an email or like a screening call, if it's an in-person interview. Otherwise, just go for formal. Then after the interview, make sure you're sending a thank you email reiterating your interest in the role. Then something that specifically stood out for you during the interview, like I really enjoyed speaking about this, and this with this person. And then if you don't receive a response, and you didn't ask like the return time, make sure you're following up on that. And you might have to follow up once, twice, 3 times, but remember to not feel discouraged if you get a no, because you only need, 1 yes. And then with that, we'll go back to Q&A. So Alex, specifically, you mentioned that for the company you're working right now, you had a 5-hour technical interview. So like, just what was that process like? And what questions were you asked, I'd say?
Yeah, so luckily it wasn't a full 5-hour technical interview, but like it was 2 hours of it was definitely like full technical based. But I mean they had my resume in front of me, so they were mostly just asking like the projects I worked on. So like because of the way I have my resume formatted, for like education and stuff, I have school and then the projects I worked on. So they kind of went through all of those projects that I had listed and asked more of the technical aspects. So what did I work on? And I kind of just would like explain what I did. The two main things for my interviews that I always talked about were the work I did in Hyperloop and what I did for my senior project. Those were the two main things that I used to talk about all my technical skills, because I feel like those encapsulated what a lot of my skills were. So like for the robotic arm that I worked with, I used RF receivers to make like a wireless controller. So you'd move the controller hand, it would make the robotic hand move. So I explained, because I did all the circuitry for that and I built like little custom circuits for that. So I explained my thought process of the building it, because I even also did the mechanical side of it too. So I like explained how the mechanical and electrical worked in tandem, because I had a pulley system to make the strings move when they would get whatever signal they needed to start moving. Chris was also very helpful with that. But I would kind of just talk about all that technical stuff. And then for Hyperloop, power team focused on voltage regulation. So I explained to them all the circuits that we worked on, because they use a lot of, or that I've been using now, they use a lot of like buck converters, and one of the voltage regulators they had was a buck one. So they had a lot of questions on basically if I knew what the buck converter does, how it worked, and I did. So I just like explained how it worked. And then I drew out some of the circuits that I did and explained how it worked and the reason why it was designed this way. So it was mostly just more of that technical stuff. One of the guys I work with, his name is DC. He's been in the industry, I think, for over 40 years as a EE. He's worked on a lot of stuff. So like he wasn't familiar too much with what a Raspberry Pi was. So he was like, even most like the two other guys that were there didn't know too much about it. And I like explained to them what a Raspberry Pi does, the different, I've used the Raspberry Pi 4 and the Zero. So I explained kind of what the differences between the two were, how I've used them in Hyperloop or even just on projects. And they were impressed that in general, I was able to explain so well how the Raspberry Pi worked. But that was it was mostly just on my resume that they asked. So they mostly just wanted to know the technical skills I had, and that I'd learned on the project base, because I let them know in the beginning I knew nothing about aerospace, so I wouldn't really be able to answer any questions related to that. So I don't think they asked me too many questions related to that, but mostly just what I learned at Cal Poly, what I liked, what I didn't like, technically what I'm looking to do, what I want to get better at. Like for me, like I want to get better at circuit design and understanding how schematics work and all of that. So that's kind of just what I said for my answer of what I wanted to learn and work on. And still learning that now. So but yeah, just that technical interview was more based on my projects. Some of the other ones, two of the other ones I actually brought in my senior project, so I was able to physically show them. And I also shared Hyperloop symposium PowerPoints to kind of show some more of the technical things, because even though I didn't work on some stuff, I knew how to explain some of them and could explain what Hyperloop kind of did as a whole, which they also really liked. But those were my experiences with the technical. It was very oriented to what I had on my resume project wise and class wise. They kind of just took my resume and would just ask me questions related to that, or a lot of them, or they would ask things like in school I didn't know what an FPGA was, and they would ask me questions like that. Where because some schools probably teach it, Cal Poly, because I'm an EE, I didn't have to take the class that they talk about it in. So it's also questions like that. They're like, oh, do you know how to do this, this, and this? How's your experience? Like they are really big on op amps, and I'm probably novice on how op amps really work and the understanding. So I could explain to them kind of like what the different like op amps and like the different circuits, like what they do. But they mostly just wanted to know that I knew some of the basics on like at least a novice level for me. But that's what usually most of them are looking for. A lot, I had a couple that gave me like circuits and they said analyze the circuit, what does it do, what is it, but I only had a couple that did that. Or they'd say, if one of the interviews I had that was like grilling me on my resume, they said if we have, it was for making electric cars, so they said like, oh, like if we're using a transmission this way, like how does it work? But that side of the power stuff was not really my strength, so I didn't really know how to answer that. So I would just say like, oh, can I make a guess? And they would let me kind of guess at it, or would kind of explain it to me as I went on. Uh, but yeah, I would say it's my technical interviews. Some of them had questions ready and like would draw out circuits for me to analyze, and some were more focused on what I'd learned in school and in the projects I'd done.
Yeah, and then I'd say for if you don't know how to answer a question, maybe just say, I don't exactly know how to answer it, but I can show you my process of how I would go about doing it. Just like Alex said, can I take a guess? Can I show you how I think about it? Because that's an important skill. And then some companies, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing like weird feedback. Some companies might have very extensive technical interviews, like SpaceX. I remember some person telling me they had to sit through like a 4-hour technical interview where they were genuinely given like an actual engineering problem and had to do it fully. Or like some, coding interviews require them to go through a bunch of problems. But yeah, so that's it for technical interviews. Any questions from the audience? We are approaching our time, but any questions? Any other just general questions before we're done for the night? I don't think we have any questions. So we can end our workshop here. Thank you everyone for coming to the 11th Hyperloop workshop. Make sure to definitely fill out the Arduino workshop form. It closes tonight, 11:59 p.m. I've also sent an email to everyone who's registered. Respond to the email, otherwise we're gonna, delete you off of there. But yeah, make sure to register for it. It'll be really fun. We'll be coding together Arduinos as a team and racing them around the 3rd floor. And we have a really cool track set up that I designed, and it's going to be really great. Otherwise, thank you, everyone. We are done for the night, so I'm going to end the recording.
Thank you, Alex.